This presentation is Design Build Risk Management. I am Kent Holland with ConstructionRisk LLC. I've broken the presentation down into multiple parts. Each one will be addressing a different lesson learned. Lesson 1. Different roles and responsibilities in design build as compared to design bid build. In this lesson we're going to talk about some of the distinct differences between the risk management that confronts a designer, a contractor, and a project owner when dealing with the traditional design bid build project as compared to the design build project. Let's look first at the traditional design professional role. The designer on the normal design bid build project is going to design the project according to the owner's budget and functional needs. The designer will write the plans and specifications, will review the contractor bids, probably has assisted the project owner in crafting the actual construction contract and maybe even helping to determine what qualifications might be needed for a contractor. When the contract bid comes in, the designer may review the contract bids and the submittals, and then once the contract is awarded, we'll have an ongoing role very often of monitoring the contractor's compliance with the contract documents, may monitor and review the contractor's work to determine that it's meeting the plans and specifications. The designer is representing the owner's interests. In the traditional design professional role, the designer is going to resolve change order requests. So a change order request comes in from the contractor, and the designer has a duty to act impartially, to review the request and act as a quasi-judge. The designer also has a role to resolve disputes, the initial dispute decision maker. In performing all services, the designer is held to the normal standard of care, the generally accepted standard of care. In other words, don't perform negligently. The designer is not responsible for means, methods, procedures of construction. That's what the contractor takes on as its responsibility. Nor is the designer responsible for site safety. Again, that's typically the contractor's role. So what is the design professional's liability in the traditional role, and to whom? Typically, the responsibility is directly to the project owner. That's the party that the designer has a contract with, not with the contractor. So there generally is no liability to the contractor because there is no contract, and the economic loss rule applies in many of the states to prevent someone like a contractor who has no contract with the designer from filing suit. Now that's not true everywhere, but that's a normal rule, I'll say, in the majority of states. There's potential liability to the owner for contractor claims that arise out of negligent professional services. But here, this would be where the contractor alleges that its work was somehow impacted, delayed, cost more due to design defects. And in that case, there's the Spearman doctrine that causes a project owner to have an implied warranty of specifications to the contractor. So the contractor recovers from the owner, but the owner cannot recover from the designer unless the owner can go back and prove that the designer was negligent in its design. So again, the liability of the designer is for negligent acts, errors, and omissions, not every act, error, or omission. So there's no warranty, there's no guarantee, there's no promise of perfection by the designer to its project owner. You have liability that could come up contractually between the designer and the project owner through the indemnity agreement, and we see these agreements where the designer may be asked to indemnify and hold harmless the project owner for damages to the extent caused by the negligent performance of the designer. Hopefully it doesn't go beyond that, because then it becomes an uninsurable indemnity obligation. Again, there's no warranty or guarantee coverage in an insurance policy, so the designer wants to avoid having warranties and guarantees promising perfection of its services. There's also potential liability for misrepresentation. So we do see project owners sometimes suing the designer for misrepresenting either the quality of the services, what the services would accomplish, etc., or the budget, etc. And then occasionally there is third-party liability to lenders that loan money to the project owner, and they claim that they relied on perhaps the payment application reviews and approvals by the designer. There are also suits by property purchasers against designers. There are laborers that sometimes sue designers for site safety issues, and these are laborers of contractors, not the own employees of the designer. These are all types of suits that we see against designers in the traditional role. Let's turn now to the contractor's role on the traditional project. The contractor is going to build the project per the plans and specifications. It's entitled to rely on the designer's design and on the accuracy of the plans and specifications. It has no design responsibility, and it's entitled to complete the project as quickly and cost effectively as it possibly can while meeting the intent of the contract documents and the design. It warrants the materials and workmanship. The AE, the designer, is the owner's agent and representative for the project decisions, and in order to prove a claim of entitlement, the contractor is often going to try to prove that there were plans and specifications flaws, that perhaps there was interference with its work by the designer or the owner or some other contractor or party with whom the contractor is not responsible, or perhaps differing site condition claims. And sometimes we'll see claims that there was bias by the design professional that caused an unfair rejection of any number of things, their equipment, their substitutions, their value engineering, or even rejection of their change order requests. So these are the types of things that we sometimes see lead to claims by contractors. And again, those claims typically are going to go against the project owner, and the owner in turn might come back against the designer in either a separate action, or perhaps they'll consolidate these actions into a single setting. The contractor in the traditional role is liable for timely completion. We typically see liquidated damages for delays in meeting the schedule. Liability for materials and workmanship warranties not being met. Responsible for means and methods of the performance. The plans and specs must be followed, and the contractor is entitled to a change order from the owner if there were errors in the plans and specs that, when those were followed, the project could not meet the owner's needs. In other words, the contractor, in following the plans and specs, would not succeed in its work. Therefore, it's entitled to a change order. And again, that's the Spearman doctrine, where the owner guarantees, gives a warranty, an implied warranty of the specifications between the owner and the contractor. And the claims always go directly against the project owner. In my law practice, representing contractors, I have often advised against the logic or wisdom of filing a suit against a design professional who is working for the owner. I'd rather see a contractor file a suit directly against the owner. And then that way the owner, we're only as a contractor fighting with the owners and the owner's attorneys, and not simultaneously fighting with the design professional and all of its attorneys, doing double depositions, having multiple lawyers against us. It is just, in my view, better that the contractor goes against the owner and let the owner decide how they want to deal with the design professional. Like here again, if the contractor goes against the owner, you don't even have to prove negligence. You just show there was a breach of the implied warranty of the specifications. Whereas if you sue a designer, you've got to show the designer didn't meet the standard of care. Well, why would you want to do that when you can go so easily to the owner and let them either get caught in the middle without being able to recover from the designer because they can't prove negligence, but they still have to pay the contractor its due under the change order. Now, when we move to design build, there can be a greater expectation on the part of the owner that the project's going to be efficient, that there's going to be better performance, that it's going to meet the budget, that the cost estimates are going to be more accurate, and that there's going to be timely performance, and the owner has only one party to deal with, whoever it signed the contract with, whether it was the designer or the contractor was taking the lead. There's a single point of responsibility. It makes life easier for the owner. I would like to talk about two different ways that we sometimes see these deals put together. Generally, the construction contractor is going to take the lead, and the designer will work as a subcontractor or subconsultant to the contractor. However, there are projects where the designer becomes the lead, and then the designer has the responsibility of the owner, and then has a contractor working as a subcontractor to the AE or the designer. I will talk first about the AE taking the lead. So here, the designer is going to be liable to the owner and the contractor for the design defects, because here the contractor has a direct contract with the designer. So if the defects are defective and it causes the contractor to have to do rework or more costly work, then depending on how the contract was written between the designer and the contractor may recover directly from the prime AE. Likewise, the AE had liability directly to its client, the owner, so it's stuck with liability both directions. The designer might be guaranteeing that its design is going to achieve specific program and performance results. The contractor, when having a dispute, may be, again, with the design professional rather than the owner. The faulty plans and specifications becomes the designer's responsibility instead of the owner's responsibility. So in this case, the contractor might argue that it's entitled to that implied warranty of the specifications, not from the project owner, but rather from the design professional. And in that case, may not even need to prove negligence or breach of standard of care on the part of the design professional. So again, you have to be very careful of how your contract language reads in that contract between the designer and the contractor to determine what legally is going to happen there. Contractor delay or breach of warranty may cause contractor liability, again with a claim directly against the engineer. Or it may be that if the construction contractor caused a delay and the breach of its construction warranty equipment materials, then the engineer may have a claim directly against the contractor for how those issues impacted the engineer on this project and its profit, etc. Let's look now at liabilities under the design-build method where the contractor takes the lead. So the design professional becomes liable directly to the contractor for faulty design, delays, erroneous estimates of labor or costs that were relied upon by the construction contractor, and liable for all acts, errors, omissions, regardless of negligence, again, depending on how that contract is written. And I see many of these contracts where the contractor takes the lead and the subcontract with the designer states that the designer is responsible for all the damages that it causes, and it doesn't say due to the negligence or willful misconduct of the designer, but rather it's anything due to problems or errors with the designer's services, which they often will call work. So again, become very aware of how that contract language reads. The contractor has liability when it has the lead role. Its liability is going to be to the owner for the design error. So here, even though it's not directly writing the design, the plans and specs, its subcontractor, the designer, is, so the contractor has the liability to the owner for the defective designs. Also, the contractor is going to have liability at law for the defective designs and will need professional errors and omissions coverage for its own liability arising out of its subconsultant's services. And we're going to talk more about insurance in a separate lesson learned. The contractor is going to have liability to the trade subs for the defective specs that it might have written or that its consultant might have written. It has potential liability to the design professional for delays and breach of contract. It has its warranties and performance guarantees, and of course it's responsible for means, methods, and procedures of its performance. I mentioned the concept of single point of responsibility. This is one of the things that owners like about design build. They don't have to go and point a finger at the contractor, and then at the architect, and then at the engineer all separately. It's all in one house. It's all under one point of responsibility. So the design builder is liable to the owner, whether the damages are caused by the contractor, the designer, or a trade sub. An example is where a contractor promised a turnkey service that would build a house. There were multiple defects, and these defects included sagging garage beams. And the contractor argued that it wasn't responsible for the AE's design defects. And the court looked at this and held that the acts and the omissions of subcontractors, such as the designer in question, are attributable to the design builder. And that's the case of Taylor versus Burton, and a 1998 case out of Louisiana. Let's go next to Lesson 2 on joint ventures and teaming agreements.